When the Apache warrior appeared at Clara's door in the midnight storm, his desperate eyes begged for her healing knowledge to save a dying child. Her decision to help him would forever mark her as a traitor to Willow Creek and ignite a forbidden love that would transform both their worlds. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. In the shadow of the Painted Rocks Mountains, where the sky stretched endless and blue above the parched earth of the Arizona Territory, Takoda rode alone. His dark eyes, sharp as an eagle's, scanned the horizon with practiced vigilance. The year was 1871, a time when treaties were made and broken like twigs beneath boot heels, when a man's word held more power than paper signed by distant authorities. For Takoda, the last of his family line among the Apache, these monthly journeys into the white man's settlement were necessary but unwelcome. The rhythmic hoofbeats of his paint horse echoed his heartbeat, steady, measured, alive. His long black hair, secured with a leather strip at the nape of his neck, danced against his shoulders with each step of his mount. At 28 winters, Takoda carried himself with the quiet dignity of one who had survived where others had fallen. Disease had claimed his parents and siblings 4 winters ago, leaving him with memories and responsibilities that weighed on his broad shoulders like invisible stones. "Today we trade, then leave," he murmured to his horse in his native tongue, one hand resting on the bundle of carefully prepared pelts tied to his saddle. No lingering among those who fear what they do not understand. The town of Willow Creek appeared on the horizon, a collection of wooden structures that seemed to rise from the dust like pale mushrooms after rain. It was larger than when he had first visited as a boy with his father, growing with each year as more settlers pushed westward. The cluster of buildings, the general store, saloon, blacksmith, small church, and scattered homes, represented both opportunity and danger. As he approached, Takoda straightened his spine and schooled his features into the impassive mask he wore among the white townspeople. He had learned that showing no emotion was safer than revealing the storm that sometimes brewed within. The fewer words spoken, the fewer reasons they would have to remember his presence. The town's main street was busy with the usual activities of a fall morning. A wagon loaded with supplies rumbled past, the driver tipping his hat to a woman in a dusty blue dress. 2 men stood smoking outside the saloon, their conversation dying as they noticed the approaching rider. Children who had been playing with hoops froze momentarily before their mothers called them inside, doors closing like flowers at dusk. Takoda ignored the wary glances and suspicious stares. They were as familiar to him as the weight of his knife against his hip. He dismounted with fluid grace in front of the general store, tying his horse to the post with practiced ease. The bundle of pelts he carried represented weeks of patient hunting and careful preparation. Beaver, rabbit, and 2 particularly fine fox pelts that would fetch a good price from Mr. Hollister, the store owner who, despite his initial misgivings, had come to appreciate the quality of Takoda's goods. The bell above the door announced his arrival, and the murmur of voices inside diminished to silence. Takoda's eyes adjusted to the dimmer light, taking in the shelves stocked with goods from back east, bolts of fabric, jars of sweets, tools, ammunition, and the precious salt, coffee, and flour he had come to purchase. Behind the counter, Mr. Hollister cleared his throat. "Back again, I see," he said, neither friendly nor hostile, a neutral greeting that acknowledged their business relationship without extending beyond it. Takoda nodded once, placing the bundle on the scarred wooden counter. "Good pelts," he said, his English sparse but clear. "Fox, beaver, rabbit." As Hollister examined the pelts with expert hands, Takoda felt a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, the feeling of being watched with more than the usual curiosity. He turned slightly, catching a glimpse of a woman he had not seen in town before. She stood by the fabric bolts, her fingers lingering on a length of calico, her eyes, a startling shade between green and brown, meeting his for a brief moment before dropping to the floor. Something about her gaze, lacking the usual fear or disgust, caused Dakota to pause longer than he normally would. There was curiosity there, perhaps even kindness. But Dakota had not survived this long by misinterpreting the intentions of strangers. He turned back to his business, focused on completing his transaction and departing before the sun reached its zenith. Yet as he collected his payment and gathered his supplies, he could not shake the feeling that this visit to Willow Creek would somehow be different from all those that had come before. Clara Bennett kept her eyes lowered as the Apache man turned away, but her fingers had stopped their mechanical motion of feeling the fabric's texture. At 23, she had learned to be invisible when necessary, to make herself small and unnoticed, a skill born of necessity rather than nature. The daughter of the town's former doctor, she had once held a place of respect in Willow Creek, but that status had withered with her father's death 2 winters ago. Now, as an unmarried woman well past the age most girls wed, she existed in that tenuous space between acceptance and rejection. "Miss Bennett," Mr. Hollister called, breaking her reverie. "Your thread and needles are ready, and might I suggest you complete your business promptly? It's not fitting for a lady to linger when certain customers are present." Clara straightened her spine beneath the faded blue dress she had mended 3 times already. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Hollister, but I believe all of God's children deserve the dignity of being called customers without qualification." Her voice was soft but unwavering, the kind that rarely raised in volume but carried an unmistakable resolve. She felt rather than saw the Apache man pause in gathering his supplies, though he gave no outward indication that he had heard her words. Hollister's face pinkened with a mixture of embarrassment and irritation, but Clara had already moved to the counter, counting out the precious coins for her sewing supplies. Her business was modest but steady, mending clothes, creating simple dresses, and occasionally crafting a wedding gown or baptismal outfit. "Will that be all, Miss Bennett?" Hollister's tone had cooled considerably. "Yes, thank you." She placed her purchases in her worn basket and turned to leave, nearly colliding with the broad chest of the Apache man. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, marks of a life lived under the harsh desert sun, and the subtle patterns woven into the band that secured his hair. His face remained impassive, but his eyes, dark as the night sky, seemed to search hers for something. Clara did not look away as most would have. Instead, she offered a small nod of acknowledgement, one human being to another. It was a simple gesture, nothing more than basic courtesy, yet in Willow Creek, it was a radical act. The Apache man returned the nod almost imperceptibly before stepping aside to let her pass. As Clara walked out into the brightness of the day, she felt oddly shaken, though nothing of consequence had occurred. Behind her, the bell of the general store chimed again, signaling that the man had also exited. Clara set a brisk pace toward her small home at the edge of town, the basket heavy on her arm. The sounds of the town, children's laughter, the blacksmith's hammer, horses nickering, faded as she became lost in thought. She had not missed the whispers that followed her, the sidelong glances from the women who had once called on her father for their ailments, and now wondered aloud why she didn't simply marry or move back east to distant relatives. Too proud, they said, too educated for her own good. What man wants a wife who knows more about bodily humors than how to cook a proper stew? They didn't understand that Clara carried her father's legacy like a precious flame, his knowledge of medicine, his belief that all deserved care regardless of background. She had assisted him since childhood, learning to identify herbs, set bones, and stitch wounds. This knowledge, neither officially recognized nor socially valued in a woman, was both her strength and her isolation. Lost in these thoughts, Clara barely registered the heavy footsteps approaching from behind until a rough hand gripped her arm, spinning her around. "Well, if it ain't the high and mighty Doc's daughter," sneered Jeremiah Tate, his breath sour with morning whiskey. Behind him stood his younger brother Edwin, thin-faced and grinning. "Defending savages now, are you? Town's been talking about how you need a man to set you straight." Clara tried to pull away, her heart hammering against her ribs like a frightened bird. "Release me, Mr. Tate. I have business to attend to." "Oh, we've got business all right." Jeremiah tightened his grip, glancing around the deserted side street. "Thought we might teach you about being friendly to the right sort of people." Edwin snickered, moving to block any retreat. "Just a little lesson in manners, Miss Bennett." Clara's mind raced, calculating the distance to the nearest house, wondering if her screams would bring help or simply amuse these men further. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, Jeremiah's grip vanished as a shadow fell across them all. The Apache man stood there, silent as a mountain, his presence alone causing both Tate brothers to take involuntary steps backward. Takoda stood motionless, his stance deceptively relaxed, though Clara could sense the coiled tension in his body, like a mountain lion preparing to leap. The silence stretched between them all, broken only by the distant sounds of the town and the nervous shuffling of Edwin's boots in the dirt. "This ain't your concern, Indian," Jeremiah finally spat, his hand instinctively moving toward the knife at his belt. "Move along." Takoda's eyes never left Jeremiah's face, his expression unreadable. When he spoke, his voice was low, each word carefully chosen and delivered with deliberate precision. "The woman goes free." Edwin glanced at his brother, uncertainty replacing his earlier bravado. Maybe we should—" "Shut up," Jeremiah snapped, his pride visibly wounded by the interruption. He squared his shoulders, though Clara noticed he kept a cautious distance from the Apache. "You threatening me, boy? Because last I checked, your kind ain't exactly welcome to make demands in this town." Clara felt her indignation rise at Jeremiah's words, but before she could speak, Takoda shifted his weight slightly. The movement was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it carried such unmistakable purpose that both Tate brothers automatically stepped back. "I make no threats," Takoda said evenly. "I state what will be." Perhaps it was his calm certainty, or perhaps it was the knowledge that even drunk, Jeremiah recognized the difference between a man who boasted of violence and one who had lived it. Whatever the reason, after a tense moment, Jeremiah released a string of curses and spat on the ground. "Come on, Edwin, ain't worth the trouble." He pointed a finger at Clara. "This ain't finished, Bennett. And you," he turned to Takoda, "better watch your back in town." The brothers retreated, Jeremiah's shoulders stiff with wounded pride, Edwin casting nervous glances over his shoulder until they disappeared around the corner toward the saloon. In their wake, the silence between Clara and Takoda felt heavy with unspoken words. Clara adjusted her basket, suddenly aware of how her hands trembled. "Thank you," she said simply, finding it difficult to meet the intensity of his gaze. "They wouldn't have... That is, I don't think they would have truly harmed me, but I appreciate your intervention nonetheless." Takoda studied her face, as if searching for something in her features. Then he nodded once, the gesture both acknowledgement and dismissal. He turned to leave, apparently considering the matter concluded. "Wait," Clara called, surprising herself as much as him. He paused, looking back at her with a raised eyebrow. "May I know your name? I'm Clara Bennett." The question seemed to catch him off guard. Few in town had ever asked for his name, content to refer to him as the Indian or worse. After a moment's hesitation, he answered, "Takoda." "Takoda," she repeated, careful to match his pronunciation. "It's a fine name. Does it have a meaning?" Again, that slight surprise flickered across his face. "Friend to all," he said, an edge of irony in his voice given what had just transpired. Clara smiled, a genuine expression that softened her features. "Well named, then." She hesitated, then added, "I'm the closest thing this town has to a doctor now, though without formal training. If you ever need medical assistance, my home is the small white one with blue shutters at the east end of town." Dakota regarded her curiously, clearly unprepared for the offer. Finally, he gave another slight nod before turning to continue on his way. Clara watched him go, aware of curtains twitching in nearby windows and knowing that by sundown, the entire town would be buzzing with this encounter. She would face disapproval, perhaps even ostracism for this brief exchange, yet she felt oddly unburdened. There was something liberating in having nothing left to lose in the court of public opinion. As she resumed walking home, Clara found her thoughts returning to Dakota. What kind of life did he lead beyond the town's boundaries? What joys and sorrows shaped his days? She had seen something in his eyes, intelligence, dignity, and a profound loneliness that seemed to mirror her own. From his position near the general store where he was preparing to mount his horse, Sheriff Miller had witnessed the entire exchange. His weathered face creased with concern as he watched Clara disappear down the street. Then his gaze hardened as it followed Dakota's retreating figure. "Trouble," he muttered to himself, adjusting the badge on his chest. Nothing but trouble brewing. The autumn sun beat down on Willow Creek, indifferent to the currents of tension now flowing beneath the town's dusty surface. A hawk circled overhead, its cry piercing the afternoon quiet like a prophecy. The journey back to his people's camp took Dakota through landscapes few white settlers ever witnessed. Narrow canyons where the wind sang ancient songs through the rocks, hidden valleys lush with life despite the arid surroundings, and finally the secluded mesa where smoke from cooking fires rose like prayers to the vast sky. As he approached, children playing among the scattered juniper trees spotted him and ran ahead, announcing his return with high, clear voices. Dakota dismounted, his muscles aching from the long ride. He removed the supplies from his horse and patted the animal's neck in silent gratitude before allowing a young boy to lead it away to water. All around him, the camp continued its rhythm, women grinding corn and preparing meals, men crafting weapons or repairing shelters, elders watching with eyes that had witnessed the changing times, recording history and memory where the white man used paper. "What news from the town, brother?" asked Nahele, approaching with a water skin that he offered to Dakota. Though not related by blood, they had grown close after Dakota lost his family, united by a shared determination to preserve their people's ways while adapting to the encroaching world of the white settlers. Dakota drank deeply before responding. The usual, their numbers grow. More buildings rise where there was only earth before. He hesitated, uncharacteristically reluctant to mention his encounter with Clara Bennett. "Their fear remains." Nahele nodded, his expression grim. "And their soldiers? Any sign of increased patrols?" "None that I saw, but we should remain vigilant." Dakota moved toward the center of the camp, Nahele walking beside him. "How fares Kimi?" A shadow crossed Nahele's face. "The fever persists. Makia has tried every remedy she knows, but the child weakens." He looked away, unable to hide the worry that creased his features. "It is not like any sickness we have seen before." Dakota felt a tightness in his chest. Kimi, Nahele's daughter, was only 6 winters old, with bright eyes that sparkled like stars and a laugh that could melt the coldest heart. The thought of that light being extinguished was unbearable. "Let me see her," he said, setting aside his fatigue. The child lay on a bed of soft hides inside Nahele's lodge, her small body burning with fever, yet shivering beneath the blankets. Her mother, a pony, sat beside her, singing softly while applying cool cloths to her forehead. She looked up as Takoda entered, hope and desperation mingling in her eyes. "Her breathing grows more labored," a pony whispered, stroking her daughter's damp hair. "Makia says if the fever does not break by morning—" She could not finish the sentence. Takoda knelt beside the child, his hand gentle as he checked her pulse, rapid and weak like a butterfly's wing. He examined the rash that spread across her chest and listened to the rattling sound in her lungs. The symptoms reminded him of something his father, once a respected healer among their people, had described from his youth. But the treatment required plants that no longer grew in their current territories. As he left the lodge, the tribe's elder, Makia, approached, her face lined with wisdom and concern. "You recognize this illness," she said. "Not a question, but a statement." Takoda nodded. "My father spoke of it. He called it the fire in the chest. He used a remedy made from the purple flower that grows near running water, mixed with the bark of the willow tree." Makia's eyes widened slightly. "The star-shaped flower with 5 petals. I know of it, but it does not grow here." She sighed, the weight of many lost battles evident in the slump of her shoulders. "Without it, I fear the child will join her ancestors before the next sunset." Takoda stood in silence, his mind racing. The purple flower, gentian, he had heard the white settlers call it, grew near streams in the foothills. He had seen some not far from Willow Creek, and willow bark was abundant near the town that bore its name, but returning so soon would raise suspicion, especially after the confrontation with the Tate brothers. Then another thought surfaced. The woman, Clara Bennett. She had offered medical help, claimed to have her father's knowledge of healing. Would she know of these plants? Would she help an Apache child? "I will return to the White Town," he announced, the decision crystallizing even as he spoke it. Nahele gripped his arm. "It is too dangerous. You were just there. The soldiers will be watching for a lone Apache warrior." "Yes," Takoda agreed, "but my daughter's life is worth any risk." As darkness fell over the camp, Takoda sat alone before a small fire, preparing for the journey he would begin at first light. His thoughts drifted to Clara Bennett's face, the unusual directness of her gaze, the absence of fear, the offer made without expectation of return. In a world where trust between their peoples was as rare as rain in the desert, he was about to place his niece's life in the hands of a white woman he barely knew. Clara's small home sat at the edge of Willow Creek, where the ordered rows of buildings gave way to the wild tangle of nature. It was a modest structure, 2 rooms with a stone fireplace surrounded by a garden that flourished despite the harsh climate. Here, Clara cultivated not just vegetables for sustenance, but the medicinal plants her father had taught her to recognize, harvest, and prepare. This garden was her pride, her connection to the memory of Dr. Jonathan Bennett, and the source of the remedies she quietly provided to those who still sought her help. The morning after her encounter with Takoda, Clara was kneeling among her plants, dirt darkening her fingernails as she collected fresh yarrow for a tincture. The sound of approaching footsteps made her look up to see Martha Simmons, the blacksmith's wife, standing at the garden gate with a sleeping infant bundled in her arms. "Mrs. Simmons," Clara greeted, rising and brushing soil from her apron. "Is everything all right?" Martha glanced nervously over her shoulder before entering. "Little Emma's cough is worse," she whispered, as if afraid of being overheard. "I know Reverend Walsh says it's ungodly to seek help from a woman practicing medicine without proper training, but Dr. Morgan's fees." She trailed off, looking both desperate and ashamed. Clara's heart softened. Dr. Morgan had arrived in Willow Creek 6 months ago, the first proper physician since her father's death. His credentials were impressive, his manner condescending, and his prices well beyond what most families in town could afford. "Let me see her." Odile, Clara led Martha inside, gesturing for her to lay the infant on the clean table where Clara examined her patients. The baby's breathing was labored, a worrying rattle in her tiny chest. After a thorough examination, Clara moved to a cabinet filled with bottles, jars, and dried herbs, hanging in neat bundles. "It's bronchitis," she explained, mixing honey with a precisely measured amount of wild cherry bark syrup. "Give her this 3 times daily, and steam the room with these herbs morning and night." She placed a packet of fragrant leaves into Martha's hand. "And bring her back in 2 days. There's no charge, Mrs. Simmons." Martha's eyes welled with tears. "The things they're saying about you in town, about you and that Apache yesterday. It's not right, Miss Bennet. Not after all you've done for folks around here." Clara's hands stilled momentarily. "What exactly are they saying?" Martha looked uncomfortable. "Sheriff Miller is telling anyone who'll listen that you were friendly with that Indian brave. Jeremiah Tate is claiming he saved you from being carried off, and Reverend Walsh," she hesitated, "he mentioned you specifically in his morning sermon, said a woman alone is susceptible to the devil's influence, and that your father's scientific ideas left you vulnerable to savage ways." A familiar weariness settled over Clara. "I see," she said quietly. "And what do you think, Mrs. Simmons?" The woman clutched her baby closer. "I think my Emma might have died without your help. That counts for something in my book." She paused at the door. "But please be careful, Miss Bennet. People are afraid of what they don't understand." After Martha left, Clara stood in her doorway watching as dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising a rare autumn rain. How quickly rumors spread in Willow Creek, twisting and growing with each retelling. She had known there would be consequences for speaking to Takoda as an equal, for accepting his help against the Tate brothers. Still, the speed and viciousness of the town's response left her feeling hollow. Clara returned to her garden, finding solace in the familiar work, as she had so many times before. Her father's voice seemed to whisper with the rustling leaves. "The worth of a person isn't determined by the color of their skin or the language of their prayers, Clara. Remember that." She had been remembering it since childhood, when she'd watched her father treat everyone who came to his door. Settlers, travelers, and yes, occasionally native people who risked entering the town seeking help. Jonathan Bennett had been considered eccentric at best, dangerously progressive at worst, but his skill had earned him grudging respect. Clara had inherited his compassion and knowledge, but as a woman, not his authority. As she harvested gentian flowers from the shade of her garden wall, Clara wondered about Takoda. Had he returned safely to his people? Would she ever see him again? There had been something in his eyes that spoke to her, a depth of understanding, a quiet intelligence that belied the town's dismissal of his kind as simple savages. The first heavy drops of rain drove Clara indoors as evening approached. She lit her lamps and settled by the fire with her father's medical journals, seeking comfort in the familiar pages. Outside, the wind picked up, driving the rain against her windows in sheets. It was a wild night, the kind that made people secure their doors against the darkness and the unknown that might lurk within it. When the knock came, 3 sharp raps that barely carried over the storm's voice, Clara started, nearly dropping the book in her lap. Visitors were rare enough. Visitors after dark in such weather were unheard of. She approached the door cautiously, lamp held high. "Who's there?" she called, straining to hear any response over the howling wind. For a long moment there was nothing. Then, "Takoda." Clara's hand trembled on the latch. For a moment she hesitated, aware of how opening this door would irrevocably alter her life. The rational part of her mind reminded her of the town's warnings, of the danger a woman alone might face, but something deeper, intuition perhaps, or the echo of her father's teachings, pushed her fingers to lift the heavy wooden bar. When she opened the door, the wind nearly tore it from her grasp. Takoda stood on her threshold, water streaming from his long hair and clothing, his normally imposing figure somehow vulnerable in the storm's fury. Behind him, barely visible through the curtain of rain, stood a horse, head lowered against the elements. "Come in," Clara said without hesitation, stepping back to make room. "Quickly, before you catch your death." Takoda entered, bringing with him the scents of rain, horse, and pine. In the confined space of her small home, his presence seemed to fill every corner. Up close, Clara could see the exhaustion etched into his face and the urgency burning in his eyes. "I would not come if there was another way," he said, his voice low and strained. Clara set her lamp down, the flame flickering with the drafts that slipped through the door's seams. "What's happened? Are you injured?" Takoda shook his head, water droplets scattering from his hair. "Not me, child, my brother's daughter. Fever burns through her like wildfire. The rash spreads. Her breath—" He made a rattling sound, his hands clenching at his sides. "Our medicine woman has tried all known remedies, but the sickness resists." Clara's mind immediately shifted to the professional detachment her father had taught her, symptoms catalogued, possible diagnoses considered, treatment options weighed. How old is the child? When did the symptoms begin? 6 winters, 3 days since the fever started. The rash appeared yesterday. Takoda's gaze never left her face, watching for any sign of refusal or fear. "You said you are a healer." "I have some knowledge," Clara corrected gently, "though no formal training. What does your medicine woman think is causing the illness?" "She calls it fire in the chest. My father knew the cure, gentian flower and willow bark. But gentian does not grow near our camp." Clara's eyes widened. "Purple gentian with the star-shaped petals?" Takoda nodded, a flicker of hope crossing his features. "You know it. I grow it in my garden. It's one of the medicinals my father taught me to cultivate." Clara moved quickly to her shelves, pulling down jars and packets. "If it's what I think, scarlet fever, or perhaps rheumatic fever, the gentian can help reduce the fever and inflammation. The willow bark tea will ease her pain." She gathered supplies with practiced efficiency, wrapping dried herbs in clean cloth, adding bottles of tinctures and salves. Her mind raced ahead to what else she might need: clean bandages, her father's stethoscope, instruments for examination. Only when she reached for her cloak did she fully comprehend what she was preparing to do. "Your camp. It's far." "Half a day's ride," Takoda replied. "Longer in this weather." Clara took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I'll need to leave a note. People will wonder where I've gone." She didn't add what they both knew, that her disappearance in the company of an Apache warrior would confirm the town's worst suspicions about her. As she scribbled a brief message explaining a medical emergency had called her away, Clara felt strangely calm. Perhaps because for the first time in years she was doing exactly what she had been trained to do, answering the call to heal without regard for anything but the patient's needs. "I'm ready," she said, securing her medical bag and pulling on her cloak. The weight of her decision settled around her shoulders like the heavy wool garment. "But I should warn you, I'm not much of a rider." Takoda's expression softened slightly. "The horse is strong. It will carry us both." Outside, the rain had eased to a steady drizzle, though thunder still rumbled in the distance. Clara locked her door and tucked the key into her pocket, wondering if she would ever return to this place that had been both home and prison. As Takoda helped her mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist, a shout cut through the night. Sheriff Miller emerged from the shadows, lantern held high, revolver gleaming in his other hand. "Step away from the lady, Indian," he ordered, his voice carrying the authority of his office and the prejudice of generations. "Miss Bennett, get inside now. This savage is wanted for questioning about stolen property from the general store." Clara felt Dakota tense behind her, his body coiling like a spring. The rain plastered her hair to her face as she turned toward the sheriff, whose revolver remained steady despite the weather. "There's been a mistake, Sheriff," she called, keeping her voice level. "No theft occurred. I'm providing medical assistance to a sick child in Mr. Dakota's community. As the only person with healing knowledge who will help them, I've agreed to go." Sheriff Miller's eyes narrowed, suspicion etched in the deep lines of his weathered face. "That's so. And I suppose all those supplies were freely given." He gestured toward Clara's medical bag. "Step down from that horse, Miss Bennett. Your father was an eccentric man, but even he wouldn't approve of his daughter riding off with a savage in the dead of night." Clara felt a surge of indignation that burned away her fear. "My father taught me that all human life has value, Sheriff. There's a child dying who needs help that I can provide." She straightened her spine, channeling every ounce of her father's authority. "As for these supplies, they are mine to give. If Mr. Hollister has concerns about Dakota's business transactions today, I'll personally cover any discrepancy when I return." "And when might that be?" Miller asked, his gun hand wavering slightly. "How do I know you're going willingly, that you're not being coerced?" "You have my word," Clara replied firmly. "I've left a note explaining my absence. I expect to return within a few days." The sheriff's resolve visibly faltered. Clara Bennett might be considered peculiar by many in Willow Creek, but she had never been known to lie. Her father had been respected, despite his unconventional views, and some of that respect still extended to his daughter. "I don't like this," Miller finally said, lowering his weapon slightly. "It's not proper. It's not safe." "Nevertheless," Clara said softly, "it is necessary." A tense silence stretched between them, broken only by the horse's restless shuffling and the persistent patter of rain. Finally, Miller stepped back, though his expression remained troubled. 3 days, he conceded grimly. "If you're not back by then, I'll gather a search party, and you," he pointed at Dakota, "bring her back unharmed, or there won't be a place in this territory where you can hide." Dakota gave a single dignified nod, then turned the horse away from town. As they rode into the darkness, Clara heard Miller call after them, "God help you both." They traveled in silence for what seemed like hours, the only sounds the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the gradual lessening of the rainfall. The night wrapped around them like a cloak, the occasional flash of lightning illuminating the landscape in brief ghostly tableau. Clara had never ventured this far from town, certainly never in darkness, and found herself both terrified and exhilarated by the vastness surrounding them. Dawn was breaking when Dakota finally spoke, his voice close to her ear as they navigated a narrow pass between towering rock formations. "You risked much back there," he observed. "Your reputation, your safety." Clara considered his words, watching as the first golden rays of sunlight touched the distant mountains. "Perhaps," she acknowledged. "But what value is safety if it's purchased with another's suffering? What good is a reputation among people who would let a child die rather than cross the boundaries they've drawn?" Dakota fell silent again, but Clara sensed a shift in his posture, a lessening of the rigid guard he maintained. When they paused to rest the horse and drink from a clear stream, he studied her openly as she stretched her aching limbs. "Your father," he said eventually, "he treated our people, our..." Clara nodded, cupping her hands to drink the cold, sweet water. "When he could. Not many would come to town. The risk was too great. But sometimes, in cases of great need, he would travel to those who couldn't reach him." She straightened, wiping water from her chin. "He believed healing should know no boundaries." "A rare belief among your kind," Dakota remarked, though without bitterness. "Among any kind, I think." Clara gazed at the transformed landscape around them. Rocks painted in shades of amber and crimson by the rising sun, cacti standing like silent sentinels, the vast sky stretching endlessly above. How small Willow Creek seemed now, how narrow its concerns. We all draw circles around what we consider our people. Some circles are just drawn wider than others. Dakota's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "My name," he said. "In my language it means friend to all," Clara finished for him, remembering their brief exchange in town. A wide circle indeed. Something flickered in Dakota's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or a kind of recognition. For a moment, they regarded each other not as representatives of their respective worlds, but simply as two people standing on common ground. Then the moment passed, replaced by the urgency of their mission. "We should continue," Dakota said, helping Clara remount. "The child grows weaker with each passing hour." The Apache camp appeared before them, like a vision emerging from the heat-shimmered air, a collection of dwellings nestled within a natural basin, protected by steep cliffs on three sides. As they approached, Clara felt a tightening in her chest, a mixture of apprehension and wonder. This was a world few white people ever witnessed, much less entered as a guest rather than an intruder. Children playing at the perimeter spotted them first. Their happy cries announcing Dakota's return quickly transformed into curious silence at the sight of Clara. Small faces stared with unconcealed fascination as Dakota guided the horse through the camp, heads turning to follow their progress, whispers rippling outward like stones dropped in still water. Women paused in their work, men straightened from their tasks, and elders emerged from the shade of their dwellings. Clara felt the weight of their collective gaze, wary, evaluating, yet not entirely hostile. She sat as straight as her exhausted body would allow, meeting their eyes with respectful acknowledgement rather than looking away. When they reached the center of the camp, Dakota dismounted in one fluid motion, then reached up to help Clara. Her legs nearly buckled beneath her after the long journey, but his steady hands kept her upright until she found her balance. A tall man, with streaks of gray in his long hair, approached, his face a rigid mask that failed to completely hide his concern. "Nahele!" Dakota greeted him in English, clearly for Clara's benefit. "This is Clara Bennett. She has come to help Kimmy." Nahele studied Clara with penetrating intensity, measuring her worth with a single glance. "My daughter grows weaker," he said, his voice rough with emotion barely contained. "Why should I trust a white healer when white diseases are what kill our children?" Clara met his gaze without flinching. "I cannot undo the harms my people have caused yours," she said quietly. "I can only offer what knowledge I have in the hope it might save your daughter. If you wish me to leave, I will go." An older woman stepped forward, her silver-streaked hair wrapped in a faded red cloth, her face deeply lined, but her eyes sharp and clear. "I am Makia," she said, evaluating Clara with the same thoroughness she might give to assessing a medicinal plant. "Our medicines have failed. If you have knowledge that might save the child, pride must not prevent us from accepting it." Nahele looked between them, the battle between a father's desperation and a leader's caution visible in his features. Finally, he nodded once, sharply, and gestured toward a dwelling slightly separated from the others. Clara retrieved her medical bag from the horse and followed Nahele, acutely aware of Dakota's presence behind her and the community's eyes tracking their every step. Inside the dwelling, lit by a small fire and shafts of sunlight filtering through the smoke hole above, a woman knelt beside a pallet where a small figure lay motionless beneath blankets. "A pony," Nahele said softly. "Dakota has brought help." The woman turned, her face drawn with exhaustion and fear, her eyes red-rimmed from weeping or sleeplessness, perhaps both. When she saw Clara, surprise flickered across her features, followed quickly by a desperate hope that made Clara's heart constrict. "May I?" Clara asked, gesturing toward the child. At Aponi's nod, she knelt beside the pallet and gently drew back the blankets. Kimmy lay unnaturally still, her small body burning with fever, yet shivering intermittently. The rash Takoda had described covered her chest and was beginning to spread up her neck. Her breathing came in labored gasps, each one a battle that left her visibly weaker. Clara took the child's pulse, too rapid and thready, and placed a gentle hand on her forehead, feeling the scorching heat of infection. "How long has she been unconscious?" Clara asked, already reaching into her bag for the gentian tincture she had prepared. "Since dawn," Aponi whispered, hovering anxiously. "She stopped speaking yesterday, stopped taking water this morning." Clara worked methodically, examining the child's throat, listening to her chest with her father's stethoscope, checking her eyes and the state of the rash. The symptoms aligned with her initial suspicion. Scarlet fever, advanced and dangerous, but not yet beyond hope. "I need clean water, boiled if possible," she instructed, measuring dried willow bark into a small pot, and cloths for cooling her body. Aponi moved immediately to comply, seemingly relieved to have concrete tasks. Makia entered with a clay vessel of water, watching intently as Clara began preparing the medicines. "The purple flower," the elder woman observed as Clara added gentian to her mixture. "It grows by water." "Yes," Clara confirmed, working quickly but carefully. "My father taught me its properties. Combined with willow bark, it fights fever and inflammation. I've also brought medicines to ease her breathing and strengthen her heart." For the next hour, Clara worked without rest, administering the first doses of medicine, showing Aponi how to apply cooling cloths properly, and demonstrating the steam treatment that would help clear Kimmy's congested lungs. Takoda and Nahele remained nearby, their presence a silent affirmation of her efforts. When she had done all that was immediately possible, Clara sat back on her heels, suddenly aware of her own exhaustion. "Now we wait," she said softly. "The next few hours will tell us if she responds to the treatment." "You need rest," Takoda said, speaking for the first time since they'd entered the dwelling. "You have not slept since yesterday." Clara woke disoriented, the unfamiliar sounds and scents momentarily bewildering her. She lay on a soft pallet in a small dwelling, a blanket woven with geometric patterns pulled over her shoulders. Sunlight filtered through the dwelling's entrance, suggesting mid-afternoon. She had no memory of being brought here or of falling asleep. As awareness returned, so did the memory of Kimmy. Clara rose quickly, smoothing her rumpled dress and hastily rebraiding her hair before stepping outside. The camp was alive with activity, women working at cooking fires, men crafting arrows, children running between dwellings, but all paused briefly to look at her, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and cautious acceptance. Before Clara could ask about Kimmy, a young girl approached, offering a wooden cup filled with clear water. Clara accepted with a smile and a nod of thanks, the gesture bridging the language barrier between them. The child beamed in response, then darted away toward a group of women who watched the interaction with interest. Takoda appeared at her side, his silent approach startling her. "The fever broke an hour ago," he said without preamble. Kimmy opened her eyes and asked for water. Relief washed over Clara like a cool wave. "Thank goodness," she breathed. "May I see her?" He led her to Nahele's dwelling, where they found a transformed scene from the one Clara had left hours before. Kimmy was sitting up, pale but alert, nestled against her mother's side. The rash had begun to fade, and though the child was clearly weak, the labored breathing had eased. Aponi looked up as they entered, her face softening with gratitude. "She asks for stories," Aponi said, stroking her daughter's hair, "and food. She has not asked for food in 3 days." Clara knelt beside them, her physician's eye assessing the improvement. "These are good signs," she confirmed, checking Kimmy's pulse. The medicine is working, but she must continue taking it for 5 more days to ensure the sickness doesn't return. Nahele stepped forward from where he had been standing in the shadows. The rigid guardedness Clara had seen earlier had been replaced by something more vulnerable, more human. "My family owes you a debt we cannot repay," he said formally. Clara shook her head. "There is no debt. I did only what any healer would do." "No," Nahele said firmly. "Not any healer would ride through the night to help an Apache child. Not any healer would face her own people's judgment to save one of ours." His words hung in the air between them, a bridge across the vast divide that history had carved. Clara felt something shift inside her, a recognition that the borders she had crossed might never again seem as impenetrable as they once had. Over the next 2 days, Clara's status in the camp transformed from suspicious outsider to honored guest. She spent hours with Makia, the elder medicine woman, each sharing knowledge from their respective traditions. Clara learned how certain desert plants could be used to treat wounds and infections, while Makia absorbed Clara's explanations of germ theory and the body's systems with the keen intelligence of a natural scientist. Children who had initially hidden from her now sought her out, bringing her small treasures, a perfectly shaped stone, a feather, a wildflower, gifts that needed no translation. The women included her in their circle as they worked, teaching her their craft through gestures and demonstrations, laughing gently at her clumsy attempts to replicate their skilled movements. Throughout it all, Takoda was never far away. Though he spoke little, his presence was a constant, reassuring anchor. Clara found herself watching him when he thought her attention was elsewhere, the gentle way he listened to the elders, his patience with the children, the rare smile that transformed his solemn features. Each observation added another layer to her understanding of this complex man who had risked everything to save his niece. On the evening of the second day, as the community gathered around the central fires for the evening meal, Makia beckoned Clara to sit beside her. The old woman handed her a plate of food, then looked at her with those penetrating eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface. "You have a gift," she said in her accented English. "Not just the healing knowledge, but the seeing. You look at us and see people, not enemies or curiosities." Clara accepted the food with a nod of thanks. "My father taught me to look beyond appearances. He said the human heart speaks the same language everywhere, even when the tongue does not." Makia smiled, the firelight deepening the lines of her face. "A wise man. He would be proud of what you have done here." She paused, her gaze drifting to where Takoda sat with Nahele and other men. "Our Takoda. He has carried much alone since losing his family. The weight of being the last of his bloodline, of preserving what came before. It is a heavy burden." Clara followed her gaze, feeling a flutter in her chest when Takoda looked up and met her eyes across the fire. They held each other's gaze for a long moment before Clara looked away, her cheeks warming. "The third day comes tomorrow," Makia observed quietly. "The day you told your sheriff you would return." The reminder fell like a stone into the calm pool of Clara's thoughts. Yes, tomorrow marked the deadline Sheriff Miller had set. If she failed to return, he would form a search party, potentially bringing violence to this peaceful community. "I must go back," Clara said, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. "I gave my word." Makia nodded slowly. "Words given must be honored, but remember, child, that every journey changes the traveler. The path that brought you here may look different when you walk it again." Later that night, unable to sleep despite her comfortable pallet, Clara stepped outside into the moonlit quiet of the camp. Most dwellings were dark now, the fires burned down to embers. She walked to the edge of the basin where the land fell away to reveal the vast expanse of star-scattered sky and shadow-draped desert below. "You should be resting," Takoda's voice came from behind her, though this time she had sensed his approach. "I could say the same to you," she replied, not turning around. He moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him in the cool desert night. For a time, they simply existed in shared silence, two solitary souls finding unexpected companionship beneath the vast canopy of stars. "Will you come back?" Takoda finally asked, his voice low, almost carried away by the gentle night breeze. The question held no demand, only a vulnerability Clara had not heard from him before. "I don't know if I can," she answered honestly, turning to face him. In the moonlight, his features were softened, the warrior's mask temporarily set aside. "What awaits me in Willow Creek is complicated. The town has already judged me for speaking to you, for helping you. What they'll think after this." She trailed off, the reality of her situation settling like a weight on her shoulders. "And what do you think?" Takoda asked, his gaze intense yet gentle. "Not the town. You?" Clara took a deep breath, the answer rising from a place of truth she had only recently discovered within herself. "I think I've never felt more purposeful than these past days. More myself. Here, I'm not the eccentric doctor's spinster daughter or a woman who doesn't know her place. I'm simply a healer doing what I was taught to do." Something shifted in Takoda's expression, a softening, a recognition. "My people have a saying, the path reveals itself to those who walk it with open eyes. Perhaps this is your true path, Clara Bennett." The sound of her name on his lips sent an unexpected warmth through her. It was the first time he had called her by name, and the intimacy of it made her heart quicken. "And you, Takoda? What is your path?" He looked out over the moonlit landscape, his profile strong against the star-strewn sky. "For too long, my path has been one of survival, of preserving what remains of my family's legacy. But now," he turned to her, and in his eyes, Clara saw something new, a tentative hope, fragile as the first spring blossom. "Now I wonder if there might be more." The space between them seemed charged with unspoken possibilities. Clara felt drawn to him by forces as ancient and powerful as the land itself. When his hand reached for hers, fingers brushing against her palm with gentle question, she did not pull away. Dawn painted the eastern sky with pale gold and rose as Clara prepared to depart. Kimmy, still weak but recovering steadily, had presented her with a small bracelet of woven grasses. A pony had embraced her without words, the gesture speaking volumes. Nahele had formally thanked her before the assembled community, declaring her a friend of the Apache. But it was Makia who approached as Clara mounted Takoda's horse, the elder woman's wise eyes seeing far more than Clara wished to reveal. "The heart knows its home," Makia said softly, pressing a small leather pouch into Clara's hand. "This contains seeds of the purple flower. Plant them where you belong." She stepped back, her knowing smile suggesting she already understood what Clara was only beginning to realize herself. Takoda would accompany her to the outskirts of Willow Creek to ensure her safe return. They rode in comfortable silence as the day brightened around them, each lost in private thoughts, yet acutely aware of the other's presence. As they crested the final hill overlooking Willow Creek, Clara felt a curious detachment. The town looked smaller somehow, diminished by the vastness of experience that now separated her from the person she had been mere days ago. "Will you be safe?" Takoda asked, helping her dismount. "Safe enough," Clara replied, though uncertainty clouded her voice. "Sheriff Miller will see I've returned unharmed. The rest—" She shrugged, trying to project more confidence than she felt. Takoda studied her face as if memorizing each feature. "If you need me, if you wish to return, leave a white cloth tied to the juniper tree at the crossroads. I will watch for it." Clara nodded, her throat suddenly tight with emotion. "Goodbye, Takoda." "Not goodbye," he corrected gently, "until our paths cross again." With that, he turned his horse and rode away, becoming a diminishing silhouette against the morning sky. Clara watched until he disappeared, then squared her shoulders and walked toward Willow Creek and whatever awaited her there. The town's reaction was everything she had feared, and worse. Sheriff Miller was relieved at her safe return, but advised her to remain indoors to avoid the worst of the gossip. Reverend Walsh publicly condemned her from his pulpit as a woman who had forsaken Christian propriety for savage company. Most of her patients stopped coming, afraid of association with someone so thoroughly ostracized. Yet Clara found herself strangely unmoved by their judgment. She tended her garden, prepared her medicines, and waited for the few who still sought her help: Martha Simmons with her infant daughter, elderly Mr. Peterson with his rheumatism, and, surprisingly, the blacksmith's apprentice who had been badly burned and could not afford Dr. Morgan's fees. As weeks passed, Clara found herself increasingly drawn to the window facing west, toward the distant mountains and what lay beyond. At night, she dreamed of starlit conversations and a future she had never dared imagine. The first snow of winter had just dusted Willow Creek when Clara made her decision. She packed her father's medical books, her most precious instruments, seeds from her garden, and the few keepsakes she couldn't bear to leave behind. The house, her prison, and her sanctuary she left with a letter deeding it to Martha Simmons, whose kindness had been a rare light during dark days. At dawn, Clara Bennett tied a white cloth to the juniper tree at the crossroads and waited, her heart lighter than it had been in years. He came as the day's first golden rays touched the snow-covered landscape, materializing from the morning mist like a figure from a dream. This time he was not alone. Nahele, Makia, and several others from the camp had accompanied him, a gesture of honor and acceptance that brought tears to Clara's eyes. "You are certain?" Takoda asked as he dismounted, standing before her with that same gentle intensity she had come to cherish. "Your people are those who accept me as I am," Clara finished, her voice steady and sure. "Those who understand that healing knows no boundaries." Takoda's smile then, rare and radiant, was like the sun breaking through clouds. He took her hands in his, their fingers intertwining in a simple yet profound connection. "Then come home, Clara Bennett," he said softly. "Come home." Years later, travelers in the territories would sometimes speak of a remarkable settlement hidden in the shadow of the painted rocks, a place where Apache dwellings stood alongside cabins of wood and stone, where children of mixed heritage played freely, and where the sick of all races found healing at the hands of a woman with honey-brown hair and her Apache husband. Some dismissed these tales as frontier myths, impossible dreams in a land still divided by fear and prejudice. But those who had seen it firsthand spoke of two rivers, as it came to be known, with a kind of reverent wonder, not just for what it was, but for what it represented. A place where boundaries dissolved, where different worlds met, not in conflict but in harmony, and where a love born of compassion had transformed not only two lives but an entire community. And at the heart of this settlement stood a garden where purple gentian flowers bloomed in abundance, their star-shaped petals reaching toward the sky, silent witnesses to the truth that sometimes the bravest journey is the one that leads us home.